Okay, folks, going. We are live.
Wonderful. Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. This is going to be such a treat tonight. One of my favorite people, Jayne Ann Krentz, and a new person that I haven't yet spoken to, but whose books I'm crazy about, Rachel Grant. So this is Rachel's book called Crash Site. We have signed book plates from Rachel, and the first book in what I'm hoping is going to be a long-running series of romantic suspense novels is called Dangerous Ground. It takes place in the Aleutians, has an archaeologist called, and she has a wonderful name, Fiona, which I suppose, sort of Scottish. So maybe that's where, lots of archaeology and runes and so forth apply. And a National Geographic photographer who's a complicated character. So lots of heat from them. Anyway, we have signed book plates for both, and Crash Site takes place in a Caribbean island. So I guess one question we can ask you, Rachel, as we move into this is why islands as compared to like anything else? But you could go to Tonga and watch it blow up. The way things are going.
For Dangerous Ground, the reason that it was set on an island was because my husband, who's also an archaeologist, he was going to do a job on Adak Island, and I just loved that. And it just inspired, writing a book set on an Aleutian island. And then it just continued from there as far as taking them to another island with a different feel, So.
I got it. I've been to the Aleutians, but I must say that we didn't go to an archaeological dig. Instead, the big thing in the Aleutians when we were there was the big, what is it called? The dangerous catch, or,
yeah. Deadliest catch?
Deadly catch, thank you. The fishing program is very big in the Aleutians, but there's a lot of great Japanese World War II history and other stuff in the Aleutians, so we can talk about it. Our other author tonight, Jayne Ann Krentz, this is called Lightning in a Mirror, and Jayne Ann has signed copies for us, which have appeared at the store. And she would like me to tell you that she actually can finish a trilogy. I mean, she actually wrote and said that to me, and this is the third book in her Fogg Lake trilogy, which began with a book called The Vanishing Point. Do I have that right?
The Vanishing.
Yeah. The Vanishing without the point. Anyway, so I'm gonna turn this over to the authors to talk to each other because they're friends, and that would be fun, but I will interject as the spirit moves me. So who wants to start? Jayne Ann, you want to talk to Rachel?
Yes, I want to talk to both of you because I think you both have Elizabeth Peters stories. So Rachel told me hers, and I just thought, well, that's fate. That's fate in act, or destiny or something. And then I've never heard your story, Barbara. So Rachel,
I have many Elizabeth Peters stories. She was really fond of my husband and vice versa. So we've been to visit her at home. She and I were actually planning to go to Egypt on an archaeological expedition in the winter of 2002. So unfortunately, events intervened in September of 2001 that prevented us from going. And it was very stressful for her because she had so many friends there and really wanted to travel. And she found that entire scenario really, really painful. But we were often, because of our names, Barbara Peters is my real name, but Elizabeth Peters is not her real name. Her real name is Barbara Mertz. And she wrote as Elizabeth Peters these wonderful romantic suspense archaeological adventures. And if you've never read A Crocodile in the Sandbag, you're truly missing it. But then she wrote under another name, Barbara Michaels, and they had some paranormal elements and so forth and were lighter. So anyway, people often confused us. I would occasionally get letters intended for her and whatever. But at a great moment at the Seattle Batricon, she and I were standing at the sort of entrance to one of the big rooms, and there was a corridor approaching it. And so she and I are visiting, and we saw this contingent of people come towards us. And one of the women ran up and looked right at me, and she said, "I just love your Elizabeth Peters books." She said, "They are so," and on she's going, and I could hear Barbara over here going, and so she let it go for a minute or two, and then she stepped forward and she said, "Hello," she said, "I'm Barbara Peters, and I run this wonderful bookstore in Scottsdale, Arizona." It was so great. So we ended up swapping identities for that. But I mean, she was One of the real sorrows of my life, and then we'll move on to you guys, was that for years I thought that her publisher should give her a party at the Temple of Dinder in the Museum of Modern Art, the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York City. And on the year that they decided to do that, one of my very dear friends, an editor in New York, was dying of a blood disease. And she wanted to go with me to the opera at the Metropolitan Opera House, which unfortunately is across the park. And they were not contiguous. And I had to choose between going with Sarah Ann to the opera or going to the Temple of Dinder with Barbara, which is something I had always wanted to do. And of course, in the end, I chose Sarah Ann because it was the last thing that I could do with her. And, but I was always heartbroken that I missed the big party that I agitated for forever, at the Temple of Dinder, because what better place for an Amelia Peabody book, to debut than in the temple. So those are my stories.
Rachel, tell me the one that you told me the first.
Okay, so I actually remember the first moment I ever held an Elizabeth Peters book in my hand. I was a senior in high school. And I was, they had just opened up a big bookstore a couple of miles from my house. And it was the first time I think I'd ever been into like a really big bookstore that just had everything. And I'd spent so many hours there just exploring everything because I was like in Wonderland. and so I was exploring the mystery section and I picked up, it was Street of the Five Moons. Nope, sorry, I'm saying it wrong. It was the Camelot Caper. Street of the Five Moons was the second one, which I think I went out and bought like 2 days later. So yeah, I pulled out the Camelot Caper and I just was like, oh, this looks really fun and interesting. And I just fell in love. I absolutely fell in love with her books. And it is one of those, it does feel like fate and destiny when like, I even remember that moment, like I remember it all. And actually I was thinking it was Street of the Five Moons because I even remember I have the books there in another room. I should have grabbed them to bring them in here, but I remember that the moons, they looked like the tips of fingernails, on the back cover of the book. Just the little clues and everything. But so anyways, that was my senior year in high school. And 2 years later, I'm in the summer between my freshman and sophomore year in college. And I was going to be an English major because, I was going to write fiction someday. But my school, I went to Florida State University, didn't have a fiction writing program. They didn't have, anything creative writing related. And so it was like, well, I guess I'll be an English major. And then I just sort of thought about it and it was like, well, I already know how to write. I kind of already know English, the ego of youth. And I was like, why don't I major in something that will give me something to write about? Why don't I major in the most fascinating thing in the world that I can study and I can do that job. And then at some point I'll quit that job and I will write fiction. And then I was like, I just love those Elizabeth Peters books, man. I want to be Vicki Bliss when I grow up. And so I changed my major to anthropology. And my first time scanning the catalog when it was like, okay, well, what classes can I take? And I already had signed up for Intro to Archaeology. And then I saw that a woman professor, Dr. Elizabeth Peters, taught physical anthropology, like the basic level. There were 1,000 students in the class, it was a huge class, but her name was Elizabeth Peters. And that was like, this is it. This is why I'm studying this. And now apparently she's going to be my professor, which sadly she was not, but she was a lovely woman. And I did tell her, it was actually pretty funny because the first time I met with her during office hours, I told her, I was like, I've, read these books. She's an Egyptologist, et cetera. And she was like, oh yeah, other people have mentioned her, but she hadn't read any of her books, which I just think is wrong.
Definitely wrong. We should add that Dr. Barbara Mertz, because that's her real name, was in fact a real archaeologist. She graduated from the Oriental Institute at the University of Chicago, and she wrote a really brilliant book called Red Land, Black Land, a nonfiction book about Egypt, which I think is a wonderful book. Sadly, when authors leave us, and she did die some years ago, oftentimes their books are then become difficult to find. They don't stay in print. But I really recommend that you look for the Vicki Bliss books or you look for the Amelia Peabody books. But if you read the Amelia Peabody book, you have to read The Crocodile in the Sandbank first, because the plot is such, if you read any other book first, you will never be able to enjoy The Crocodile in the Sandbank. So I don't have to say that very often, but in this particular case, I really do.
Well, then the next question, my real question, not the cute question, but the fun question. But I think I'd like to hear more about your research, Rachel, because you do such amazing research. And granted, you've had training in the field. And I will say that the reason I did not become an archaeologist was because I figured out early on you had to deal with a lot of little tiny stuff. I just wanted to find, like big ruins and mummies.
It's really bad for the eyes.
not the little shells and stuff.
Yeah.
So that's where I never went into archaeology. But talk about the research, because you obviously in Crash Site and in Dangerous Ground, you did it, a lot of it.
Yeah, and every book has a different starting place for research, but generally the starting place is the setting. And so if I can't nail a setting for a book, I can't write it. And I'll go through 16 different plots before I suddenly realize, oh no, this is where they need to be. And then the research really starts. Especially because I'm, writing the archaeology and the history. The archaeology and the history of the setting matters. It's part of the story. It's integral to the story. And so it actually drives the plot. Some of my books, not as much, because they might have a separate plot, but the character is there doing archaeology. But other books, it's integral to the plot. And so with Dangerous Ground, as I mentioned before, my husband was going to be sent to a project by the Navy. My husband, his job is basically Fiona's job. Like Fiona Carver works for the U.S. Navy, and at a particular Navy base that just might happen to be close to where I live, where my husband might work. And so he was going to be sent to the Aleutians to do an archaeological survey on a U.S. military base from World War II. And I just was like, oh, I have to know more. This sounds like an amazing setting for a book. And, and Dangerous Ground was born. Crash Site was a little different because, and to go back a little bit, I was also really lucky. This is where it's really great having a husband who's an archaeologist for the Navy, because he put me in touch with an archaeologist who works for the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, another Department of Defense job, which my husband also used to work for the Corps of Engineers. And she has done multiple rounds of fieldwork in the Aleutians. She actually brought my book with her. She brought Dangerous Ground with her to the Aleutians and took photos of it with one of the volcanoes and the islands in the background. And she's on the water, and it was just like, oh my God. So she sent me photos of their field camp and described the what the field camp situation was. And I was asking her all sorts of questions about what were the conditions of fieldwork, so that I could describe what it's like to be tromping through 6 foot tall grasses and everything. And in a land, with no trees, but this brutal whipping wind and everything. And so she really was amazing for giving me background information on how the setting would be a character. And setting for me is almost always a character in the book. But moving to Crash Site, it is set in the Caribbean. And I just so happened to have worked on a site in 1999. I got to go to St. Martin, and I worked on a project with 4 friends. It was like my dream team of archaeologists that we were sent to St. Martin. Our client was a resort. And so we each had our own room at a resort, and they were like, oh, and all the drinks and food, just, go to the bar and order what you want. And of course, I'm 9 weeks pregnant. So I was like, well, I will enjoy the juice. but I also really enjoyed the snorkeling and just getting to explore. But the project itself was recording Fort Amsterdam, which is a fort that was constructed in the 1630s by the Spanish and the Dutch, and then it continued to have revolving allegiance as well, Stuyvesant, I think I'm saying that right, the later governor of New York, I believe, he lost his leg in a battle with Fort Amsterdam. That's where he lost his leg, was, you know, that site that I worked on. And so when it was time, when I was, you know, deciding on a setting, it was like, you know, I was so excited to actually get to use a project that I actually worked on, that I actually do know what it's like to stand there in the burning hot sun with the wind whipping along and stepping on a cactus and all the you know, fun parts that happen with fieldwork. So that was a great project. And I was also had dealing with morning sickness all day long, as morning sickness can be, and swimming in the Caribbean, highly recommended. Great cure.
And I hope not flying in helicopters, because there's a terrific helicopter crash that starts out crash site. And I was hoping you weren't writing that from personal experience.
No, I've never been in a helicopter. My husband has, but for work up in Alaska. But I have never been in a helicopter. I think it would kind of terrify me. I'm kind of a wimp. Have you ever been in a helicopter, Jayne?
No, I did. My husband flew professionally and then privately, and I felt like I needed to learn how to fly for emergency reasons. You know, I didn't want to be up there in the sky with all of a sudden on my own. So I did get as far as flight training for and soloing in a little Cessna.
Wow.
Wow. Cessna. So that was, but I think what happened to me in flying is that I was always in the fully terrified mode. I never got to the enjoyment mode. So it was always very stressful, and it wasn't for me. So it was an interesting experience, and I learned just enough to be scared, you know, about what can go wrong.
So one thing I'd like to mention about crash site is that you have to practice saying the name of the island, because you are instinctually going to call it one thing. But as Rachel points out, it's really named after Sunday in Spanish, Domingo.
Yeah.
So it's called Dominica and not Dominica. And you know, it took me chapters to get it right. I kept stumbling over that, you know,
I actually watched a lot of videos that were like travel shows that talked about Dominica, and I like literally was rewinding and just saying it over and over again, because the instinct is to say Dominican, the person is Dominican, it's Dominica, and I had to train myself, and now I have trouble saying Dominican. Because it's Dominica, and and I didn't know anything about Dominica before I started writing this book. In fact, I wondered why I didn't know anything about Dominica before writing the book, because of course, like the Kalinago people live there, which is the last population of pre-Columbian indigenous people in the Caribbean. Like, I had no idea. And so that was really, I mean, and for the research, you know, I watch a lot of documentaries, I browse YouTube, I do, you know, I just search for videos where people are talking about themselves I was, for pronunciation of things, you know, how are words said. I looked for videos by Kalinago people that they were posting online that were just, you know, like, you know, where they were talking about the history of the islands and their history, you know, giving their history. And so I do a lot of that, which is great. I mean, the internet is an amazing thing, and streaming TV, I don't know how anyone ever researched without it.
But we should be very clear that this is not nonfiction, that actually this is really good suspense fiction, some really red hot romance in it. Wow. I mean, and the guy, the Nat Geo guy, I mean, he's really gorgeous and complicated. And you did a lot with birds, because Jayne Ann will talk to you about that. But I love the way that he had to set up to photograph the birds. Wow. So you learn a lot, but you really want to read it as. I actually compared you to Mary Stewart, because remember Mary Stewart used to do that. She would have a woman in a really cool place, and there would be two guys, right? There would be two potential suitors, and you read all the way through one of her books before Mr. Right would become clear and Mr. Wrong would become clear. And I love that structure. I mean, I thought Mary Stewart was. Did you guys read Mary Stewart?
Oh yeah.
I haven't, and I've been meaning to. I've heard that
you have not read Mary Stewart?
I haven't, and you are reminding me that I have this big gap in my reading history education. Because I've had multiple people recommend 9 Coaches Waiting, and I know that I need to read that.
Yeah, but My Brother Michael's the one you want to read.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yep.
All right.
Take it from me. Read My Brother Michael. Then you can read that. And also you want to read what's the one on This Rough Magic?
Okay.
Those two. Read those.
Writing this down.
And you can indulge yourself with 9 Coaches Waiting, which is very cool in Victorian France, but it's different.
Okay. All
All right. I'm going to shut up, Jayne Ann. Just drink my wine. Sorry. Carry on.
Reese, okay. Well, you know, that actually leads us to the conversation of how Rachel and I write romantic suspense, and that's what we call it. And we call it that because we think it's its own unique genre, subgenre, whatever. It is its own thing. It's not romance with a little mystery on the side. It's not suspense with a love interest on the side. It really is its own genre. And we've talked about this, and we define it by the fact that everything that happens in the relationship has to affect the plot, and everything that happens in the suspense plot will have an effect on the relationship. And in the end, you could not remove either the suspense element or the romance element and still have a story left. Yeah. It really is somehow melded together. And I really feel like this is a very American kind of story, that it feels like a very natural story here in the US. And I don't know whether it's because we grew up with it. You know, there was a lot of it around when we grew up. I just love the genre. There's never been anything I couldn't do in it, which is.
And it's also the only thing I want to write. Again, you strip out one element or the other and I lose my enthusiasm. It's just the excitement, what I'm in it for, there's something missing.
Yeah, if they work together somehow, and it's hard to explain it to somebody who doesn't, enjoy the genre or read a lot of it. But that's why Rachel and I sort of bonded, because we get it. This is our kind of story. So, and Barbara, thanks for allowing it into the suspense world of the bookstore. You've been very generous about incorporating our subgenre into the bookshop.
Well, in the first place, this is my favorite genre, so why wouldn't I? But in the second place, I have spent 20 years unbranding us as a mystery bookstore. We are only a mystery bookstore because in 1989, when I wanted to do this as, a kind of a little hobby, it was clear to me from, what I learned from law and so forth, that you needed a specialty if you wanted to survive. Unless you were going to open up a Barnes and Noble equivalent and have the whole universe of books, you needed to have a focus. It could be cookbooks, could be whatever. My mother was a big mystery reader. I love crime fiction, but I'm really a romance and romantic suspense reader too. And biography and all the rest of it. So I called it the Poison Pen, and I said it was a mystery bookstore, but I'm serious. I have worked so hard not to be a mystery bookstore. So believe me, there was nothing altruistic in including you in this. And I'm a tremendous fan of your books, and I am so glad to have discovered Rachel, because I'm just wild about Dangerous Ground and Crash Site. And I can't wait to see. Certainly hope there's going to be a third chapter. If Jayne Ann can finish a trilogy, by God, you ought to do it.
Yeah. I would just like to say that I'm very proud of that, because there have been evil rumors circulating for years that I never quite finish a trilogy. I never quite finish any series, and that's just the proof that I can. This is the third book. That makes it a trilogy, right? So.
But you sneak some of your other in here. I mean, at the very end, you snuck in one of your others. So I think
Another
I think
trilogy?
you've created a Jayne verse. You actually say that in the acknowledgement to this book. And I agree with that. And I think you've done over 50 New York Times bestsellers. And I think you've created a whole kind of universe that, regardless of whether you're writing as Jayne Ann Krentz or Amanda Quick, or more recently with Guild Boss and the rabbit, no, it's the pizza loving bunny, as Jane Castle. I think all your stuff kind of overlaps in a way, doesn't it, or interlocks?
I think so. And I think every author develops their own universe. And I think we spend our careers working within that universe. And there'll be different areas to explore, but I think on some level, we're all reaching for a new version of what we know intuitively is our core story. And that core story, we're drawn back to it again and again because that's where we get our power. And
yeah, you like the supernatural and the paranormal. I mean, you like to incorporate that sort of thing in the same way that Rachel brings in archaeology. You've got the Vortex or the Foundation or the Arcane Society.
So I was gonna, that actually brings me to one of my questions for you, Jayne, is, one, how do you describe your core story? But two, how has it evolved over the course of your career?
I don't know how it's obviously evolved because I've changed, people change, but the core elements that I think of when I define my own core story are, if I look back at the very first book I ever wrote, it's there, which is my emotional conflict will always on some level revolve around issues of trust, the risk of trust. And I think it's the biggest risk any of us ever make in our lifetimes, and we have to do it over and over again. It's not something we can walk away from. And that trust issue, if you look at any book I've ever written, is somehow in the mix. And I like the psychic vibe, in part probably because my mom was a bit of a hippie before there were hippies, a bit of a new agey type before we had a name for it. And so I grew up with the idea that it wasn't impossible, that there were other kinds of energy in the universe, and she was a great believer in, you put out good energy or bad energy, and it's up to you. And we all know people that if we're around them, they're low energy, they're bad energy, we just don't want to be around them. Other people we know are good energy. I mean, it's out there. Music is another example. Look at the energy in music, and there's no real physics there. I mean, it's something else that works on us. So anyhow, I have that kind of a woo-woo side from my background. And mostly I like it, Barbara, you'll appreciate this, because I don't have to fuss with forensics. I don't have to fuss with police procedurals. I don't have to fuss with the reality of law enforcement. And I could just invent it as I go along. So, and I think the kind of stories I like to tell kind of harken back to the days before all that became a big factor in books. More of a Sherlock Holmes approach, if you will, where it was all done by logic and reason and facts on the ground, that intuitive sensitivity, so sensibility, and the psychic vibe lets me plot that way.
Plus, make shit up, as we say. Why not?
Plus, when I did the research on Lightning in a Mirror, or the whole trilogy, as we say, the Fogg Lake trilogy, which was all about the fallout from a government experiment that went badly awry back in the last half of the 20th century. And you open the cupboard doors on that research and it just comes spilling out because the government was so heavily into it. We will never know how many millions and billions the CIA poured into paranormal research. And they did it because they thought the old USSR was into it. They didn't want to be left behind. So
is the Vortex Lab real?
Well, of course it is somewhere.
Of course, yes.
we just haven't really found the right one yet. So.
Yeah.
I'm sure it's out there. The truth is out there.
Well, it's not uncommon in speculative fiction and so forth, science fiction, to have something like an accident. Well, I mean, we've been speculating over the course, the source of COVID. Was it a laboratory accident, that went badly awry, or was it? And I don't know that we're ever going to get a real answer to it. We probably won't. And that's going to lead to endless conspiracy theories and all kinds of stuff. Now we got the Havana syndrome going, where I saw today that, nobody can quite figure out. It appears to be a real thing, but nobody's really responsible for it, as far as we know.
So I actually wrote a book, and I wrote the first draft in 2013, and it was, and then I went to Alaska because it's set in Alaska, and I needed a better feel for the setting because setting is character, and I rewrote the entire book in 2014. It published in 2015, and I have an infrasound weapon that was even in the first draft that is very much similar to what could potentially be the Havana syndrome thing. That infrasound is a very real thing, and it really can affect your organs. And it's not microwave, but it is a sound wave weapon. And I used that in a book before.
Well, I don't know why the CIA hasn't been calling on you.
Well, I predicted a few other things, so I've wondered that too. But I know I'm on some watch lists for my internet searches.
Authors always worry about that because
Yeah.
our internet searches are probably not the most reassuring.
Well, okay, so for my book, Body of Evidence, I might have a small smallpox bomb in it. It's found in North Korea, because the archaeologist connection, I actually know an archaeologist who worked in North Korea, and so like the whole setup for the story is absolutely real. It's absolutely what could happen. And he even told me later after I told him about the book, because I was asking him, for research. He even told me that, oh yeah, the rumors that they have about Americans testing smallpox bombs and weaponry on them during the Korean War is 100%. Everyone in Korea would believe that, because that's part of the propaganda that they put out there. But anyways, aside from that, so I was writing this book, and I'm Googling things like how to make a smallpox bomb, as one does, and shockingly not finding anything. And I put it out to the universe. I was like, I just wish I knew someone at the CDC. And a week after I made that wish out loud, I finaled in the Golden Heart, and that would be, it was 2011. I finaled in the Golden Heart contest, which was Romance Writers of America's unpublished writing contest. And one of my fellow finalists was Jennifer Mcquisten, who is an epidemiologist for the CDC. And she had mentioned that in an email. And so I basically immediately emailed her, and I'm like, I just wished for you, and now you have appeared. And can you help me? And she put me in touch with people in the CDC who actually are in the smallpox division, and they answered my questions in a way that was not going to let somebody else make a smallpox bomb, but it was amazing to be getting direct answers from the CDC, and really, it's for a book, I can prove it. Book is Body of Evidence. And Jennifer Mcquisten she writes historical romance. She has some wonderful romances that were published. I want to say, I think that she was first published around 12 or 13. She sold some books, and they're fantastic, but she has been super busy working for the CDC. She worked on Ebola, and she's been to Sierra Leone. I mean, she's an amazing woman. And the last several years, she hasn't been writing anymore. But if you wanted to read some fabulous historical romance by a woman who's an epidemiologist, because romance writers are brilliant. and we're in every field. Anyways, I highly recommend Jennifer Mcquisten. And she'll keep you from getting arrested for doing searches on how to make a smallpox bomb.
Which is a pretty good thing. So Jayne Ann, take us from The Vanishing through, I'm trying to remember, you have a long title for the second book, and now into Lightning in a Mirror, since you have created this trilogy.
The second one is All the Colors of Night. And I kind of learned my lesson there about long titles. Nobody can remember it, including me. If I'm suddenly asked to list all three books in the trilogy, I always fumble the name of.
I want to put a "the" in there, All the Colors of the Night, but
you get closer than I do. I just blank on it.
No, but it's also a really great title, and it really fits the book. So.
Well, I just, like I said, I've always loved the psychic vibe and the connection to the paranormal from the government research in the 50s, 60s, and all the way into the 70s, I will add, is just irresistible. It's like catnip, in terms of plots, because some of it's just classified anyway, so I can make it up, right? I mean, nobody's going to be able to prove me wrong. So, like you and your research, after a while, you just, it's so close to the truth, nobody
would believe it. How true it.
nobody would believe it. Yeah.
Yeah.
So you have two women in The Vanishing, and Olivia is now a main player in Lightning in a Mirror. So
Right. Yeah. The characters all have a connection to Fogg Lake, which is the little town that was weirdly impacted by the experiment gone awry. And so two of the women from that, the first one features in the first book, and then Olivia is the star of the third book, the final book in the trilogy. And she's been labeled everybody's decided she's the key to finding this lost lab. And so everybody's out to get her, good guys and bad guys. And so she's dealing with people who want her for all the wrong reasons.
So in your plotting of the trilogy, did you know that Harlan Rancourt was going to be her hero when you started?
No, but I've learned over the years, because I have done enough series, I've learned over the years not to tie up all the loose ends and to leave some bolt holes, because I don't know where I'm going to go with it. I'm not a very good plotter. The plot just,
I don't believe that.
I can't do it in advance. What I can do in advance is the overarching issue that we're going to be dealing with and the problem, but I don't know what complications are going to evolve and where the plot's going to go until I actually sit down to write. And I would give anything if I were one of those people who could get it all out into a nice, neat synopsis or an outline ahead of time, because that would be so efficient. But if I do it, I'll change it. I've just learned already. So I'm usually only like 3 chapters ahead in my head. And out of those 3 chapters will come the impetus for the next 3 chapters. And I can't seem to work any other way. So.
Or you have to trust the process. You've talked about trust as a major thing. So do you think trusting yourself is a big part of that?
And I've learned to do that, but it took a long time. I used to be a lot more anxious about it because maybe this is the book I forget how to go forward. Maybe this is the one that, so, but the subconscious mind, I guess, has a way of looking ahead when we're not aware of it. And by the time we get there, there's an answer. Do you plot out detail, Rachel? Because
so the only book that I've ever actually written a full synopsis beginning to end, that I followed. I have written synopses that, the only one that I ever followed beginning to end was Dangerous Ground. That was like the first time that it was.
Oh, really?
And it surprised me so much. I was like, wait, it's still working. Because I usually will know that at least the first or the second turning point, and I might have a vague idea of how the suspense is gonna, the final confrontation is gonna play out. But Dangerous Ground was the first one where I basically knew every turning point, and I knew, the things that even happen in between, their turning points. So that was like very exciting. And then I thought, well, this is going to change my life. And then of course, the next book did not go that way.
And that's another lesson that we've all learned along the way, is that no 2 books get written the same way.
Yeah.
It's always a different process. That's probably what draws us. One of the lures that compels us to keep writing is because we're still trying to figure it out.
I mean, I get to learn so much as I'm researching, and I research as I write, because I have found that I can do too much research up front and it doesn't go anywhere. It doesn't mean anything. It is meaningless without me plugging it into my framework of my story. But at the same time, research can completely influence the plot. Like, for example, you were talking about the scene where Dean sets up the blind in the tree in Crash Site. I was I was probably about 20,000 words into the book, and the book is 112,000 words thereabouts. So, so early, I'm still, beginning, but I'm deep enough that, and this is the second book with the same characters. So I definitely know the characters and everything. When I'm flipping through, like, I need some inspiration. I need to understand how, wildlife photography works. And I was flipping through and I found a documentary. It was an ornithologist teams up with a National Geographic wildlife photographer to study a particular type of bird. I can't remember what kind of bird it was, in the rainforests it was in South America, I believe. And I watched this, I think it was an hour-long documentary. They were looking at the mating habits of this particular kind of bird. And, he pulls out a bow and arrow and he shoots the line up in the tree. And I was just like, oh my God. I mean, and of course that scene, if you've read the whole book, that, is integral to the story. Without that scene, you don't have a book. And I was 20,000 words into the book before I even had that idea. So that's where the research has to, I have to research concurrently, and then the plot forms around it.
Yeah, I work a lot the same way with the research. I go into it with an overall sense of the world I'm going to be going into, and then I just start writing, and you discover what you need as you go along in terms of the research.
Yeah, exactly. The research tells me what I need to know. Then I start sending emails to people. So how do you research secret government experiments?
Well, that's the beauty of it, isn't it? Because it's like you can do anything you want. Who's going to say never? Who's going to say no? But finding out that the government was heavily invested in it, really since the late 30s, was kind of gave me open season.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, and their goals were always weaponizing it. It was always about either weapons or spies. I mean, or the idea of an assassin that could slip into a situation. So if you're dealing with government research and the psychic, you're looking at some goal of weaponizing it. That also plays into the plot, because this is a weapon that's been sitting there since the 60s, and it's potentially very devastating. So
it's the weapon in the Vortex Lab, which is lost, and your guy Harlan returns, and everybody wonders what his motivation is.
Yeah, right? Because his father used to run the organization that is now investigating Vortex, but his father used to run the organization, and he ran it pretty much like a mob boss. So nobody trusts the son coming back, because they figure he's out to take on his inheritance. But so I always like playing with that good guy, bad guy. Mm-hmm. Is he good? Is he a good guy or bad guy? That's where the trust comes in.
I was very surprised that he was the hero, but I was very excited too. When I actually didn't read the blurb. Like, I don't, like authors you love, you just buy their book. That's what you do. And so I didn't read the blurb, and I listened to it in audio, and basically the moment it's like, oh my gosh, it was like literal jolt of, oh, this is going to be interesting. This is going to be a lot of fun.
There's a real thing, and Barbara, you see this in, granted, you're no longer doing straight mysteries, but in straight mysteries, there's a real thing for the anti-hero, the man or the character. You don't know if they are good or bad, but they've got an agenda, and you sort of agree with the agenda. Whatever their goal is, you're on board with that, but you don't really know what's going on underneath the surface. And I think that anti-hero thing, I think, is just very fascinating for us. Because
it's called the wrong end of the gun. Actually, let me correct this. We still are a mystery bookstore. We're not just a mystery bookstore. So I still love it. And that is a big focus for us. But yeah, I think, there's, especially in the 19th century, in the early 20th century, there was a lot of crime fiction written where, well, let's look at Larry Block, B is for burglar. His Bernie Rodenbar series, is a burglar. And Bernie Bernie's problem is that he keeps uncovering crimes when he's already committing a crime. So it's a little difficult for him, to call the cops. Tim Hallinan written a wonderful series about a burglar, but you can go back to Fantomas, or who's the guy that's having the revival, the French guy, on TV, they redid it with a Black actor who's really good. And then they brought back the old one. And he's, he's a thief in the first remake of it.
Lupin.
It'll come to me in a minute.
Yeah, I mean, I watched.
He's heisting stuff
Yes.
out of the Louvre.
I think it is. Yeah, Lupin. I've watched some of the Japanese anime of them, and I watched the first episode of the new series, and loved it. It was just, really fun to jump into that. Yeah.
I think there's a lot of interesting crime fiction written from that standpoint, and if you take something which is also crime fiction, and you write a caper novel, like the movie The Sting is the one everybody can recognize, but there's some wonderful capers. Tom Perry writes, terrific capers. The late Donald Westlake wrote some really interesting ones. And, those are not murder mysteries, those are powered by other kinds of crimes. And, you can go all the way back to Trollope and the Eustace Diamonds, for instance, or Wilkie Collins and The Woman in White, the woman locked up in the insane asylum so they could steal her estate. All kinds of fun stuff. And yeah, the trick is to put you in sympathy with the criminal, or if not in sympathy, at least going along with the criminal. And so it sort of flips your own ethics while you're reading it.
Yeah.
And I think we kind of invented the private detective to walk that line, because the private detective occupies that space between the criminal world and the legitimate world, the authority world,
right.
The police world. And he's able to slip back and forth into those two worlds in order to get the main goal, which is justice.
He has his own code of ethics. I mean, he's basically a Western hero that, is kind of morphed. He's like a knight errant, as well. But he's not constrained by police procedural rules and so forth. And you're right, he's a champion. And, I put sort of an analogy to the Marvel comic heroes. One of the reasons I think that the Marvel comics are having such a thing at the moment is that, don't we all wish that there was some hero that would come and save us from the mess that we're in?
Do the right thing.
Yeah. Overcome the bad guys and, save us from whatever dangers of the night, that kind of thing.
And a lot of them still have their shades of gray, that they're not, even if they appear on the surface to be all perfect, they're actually, they're seeing the gray in the world and having to choose sides.
Yeah. So, the classic Batman story.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Sure.
I think crime fiction is an enormously broad umbrella. And it's really too bad to, to try to narrowly define it. But I love the fact that there's so many different genres within it. But, one of the things I think that most crime fiction is propelled by, there's some sort of sense of, if not justice, restoring order or achieving a goal. I mean, if the goal is the diamond heist, like Topkapi, remember the movie Topkapi with Peter Ustinov? He's lowering himself down into the whole bit. I think that's part of the charm. One of the questions is, in a capers, will they get away with it? And in the thriller, it's, will they catch him or defeat him? And in a murder mystery, it's who did it? But ultimately, they're kind of the same questions.
Yes. I think I would actually really love to write a caper at some point. I mean, like I mentioned, that the Camelot Caper by Elizabeth Peters was the first book that I read by her. I mean, I would love to write that.
Well, I think those Vicky Bliss books were a combination of romantic suspense and the caper.
Oh, for sure, absolutely. The hero, he was a thief. And actually, so when I was writing, up until writing Dangerous Ground and Crash Site, I had never written a book that had the romance arc playing out over multiple books. And it was a little daunting, but it kind of sounded like a fun challenge. And I honestly, like literally, as I was like trying to decide if that's the route I wanted to go, because at the time I was submitting this as a proposal to Montlake. And I thought about it, and I thought about the Vicky Bliss series and how the romance arc played out over those books, and I was like, oh, that would be really fun to write. And of course I compressed it because the romance advances much faster in my world. but that was
world when she was writing it,
exactly.
Right.
But she was part of my inspiration for that, was just in asking myself, can I do this? Is this something I would want to read? And it was like, well, yeah, I have wanted to read this. I have enjoyed this. So I can. Because it's always about what I want to read. I mean, if I'm not writing what I want to read, why am I doing it?
That's an excellent point. So Jayne Ann, this is January, which is usually a Jayne Ann Krentz month, but we're coming up to May, which is generally an Amanda Quick month. So what is it? We'll get to talk, I hope, again in May, but give us a preview of what we're looking for.
Oh, the Amanda Quick book coming out in May is another set in the My Burning Cove world. I'm just having a lot of fun with that kind of mythical version of 1930s Hollywood, California. As I always say, if you read me, you're reading for the myth, not the reality of the time. But there's always enough substance in the myth that was real that it works. That's why it works, is because it's not all fantasy. And Sleep No More is the title.
Nice.
No, I'm sorry. I'm screwing up my own titles again. It's When She Dreams. Sorry about that. When She Dreams. And it's back in Burning Cove. And this time we're dealing with a fake psychic, mind you.
I love that.
Who is
So
selling.
I did want to mention in Lightning in a Mirror that you do exploit your own landscape, because there's a lot of Seattle in this, the San Juan Islands, where you live. But I wanted to ask you about the cat. The cat is a great thing. So you are a cat person?
I'm an animal person, and
Okay.
But cats fit really well into the whole psychic thing. When you're doing the psychic vibe, there's just, they go with it, and because there's each cat is an enigma to itself, and that just works so well with the it plays well in as the animal backdrop, and it's, at least I don't have to worry about creating dust bunnies that are going to haunt me for the rest of my career.
Is he eating dust bunny? I know.
For those of you who out there who don't even know what you're
you have to read
lucky.
Skull Bus to know what we're talking about.
You now need to slip a dust bunny into Fogg Lake. They find one in one of the caves.
The dust bunny steals the show in Gold Bus. There is no question about it. So
Boy, did I learn that lesson. Yeah, I now have great sympathy for people who write cat books and dog books, because they're stuck.
You have the dust bunny book, right? I love it.
It's going to be on my tombstone. It's going to say, "Here lies what's her name. She wrote the dust bunny books." I can see that.
There could be worse things to be known for
It's
than
true.
dust bunnies. Yeah, I love it. So Patrick, why don't you come and join us and tell us if anybody's been able to follow the thread of this discussion and arrive at a decent question.
Let's see. There was a good one, a good comment that came in towards the beginning of the program. Tana says, "Boy, I'm glad that I flew in a helicopter over an active volcano before the book came out."
Good point.
Yeah, right?
Wise move.
Let's see here. Okay, Susan, let's see. Whoops, I almost lost it there. Susan says, "I would appreciate hearing about your writing process." I think this is for both of you.
Jayne, you want to start?
It's kind of chaotic, to tell you the truth. The actual physical process is I'm a morning person, so most of whatever creativity I have for the day is probably going to be in the first half of the day, and I never know too far ahead where I'm going to go until I'm probably close to the end of the book, and then all of a sudden I see the ending, and then it all comes clear. Then I have to go back to the beginning and whip it into shape. But I think a lot of people who do mysteries and suspense will tell you that they change their mind over and over again about who the bad guy is going to be. And that's me.
Right. But you've written so many books, you have confidence in your ability to go back and, make it all hang together.
Yeah, one of the virtues of surviving long enough in the business is that you do get some self-confidence about trusting your own process. But it's still unnerving at times to wake up in the morning and realize you really don't know where you're going to go with the story that day. And I've just kind of made peace with it. That's how I work. Rachel?
So for me, the way I get around the don't always know who the bad guy is going to be is that sometimes I don't hide the bad guy. Like, it's just easier that way. But there's still got to be a twist. And I don't always know what the twist is going to be. But if I'm not hiding the bad guy, I know that there's going to be some other twist that I will figure out. The magic will happen. And I am still learning to trust myself on that. But so far, it hasn't failed me. Every book I've ever written, I have published. I don't have any manuscripts under the bed. So, so I have learned to trust that I can figure it out. But it is, so for me, my writing process, really, I truly need to know the setting first, because then I can research the history and the history and the prehistory, and figure out how the archaeology is going to play into the storyline. And I will write multiple first chapters in different settings to try to find it. And I don't recommend that. It's not fun, but I always learn something about the characters, because sometimes then what I'm discovering is actually the characters and not the setting. Like, I can write some really bad, like, this setting is just wrong, but I learned something about the characters. So it's kind of can be exploration, but then there are some books that just work from the get-go. And again, it's knowing the turning points that, once I can figure out the turning points, then it's really just figuring out the ugly middle.
And the middle is always ugly.
Yeah.
Some of us don't read it.
You're not losing anything. It's just
Well, I have to practice reading triage on a frequent basis. And oftentimes, I arrive at a point where I think there's a certain amount here that, is interesting and all, but I don't really have to read it to get myself to the end.
Yeah.
What's that, Patrick? You found an example?
Well, no. I was just going to say, I've had a number of people weigh in and say how much they liked Guild Boss. We did a program about that not too long ago.
We did, and we blasted through, gosh knows how many. We had to keep reshipping to Jayne Ann because we kept selling out.
Yeah.
It's wonderful.
Now, the Jane Castle name is not one that you've used quite as much, right? Is that fair to say?
Yeah, it actually happens to be my real name. But I managed to sign it away on a bad contract early on in my career. And by the time I got it back, I had the other two names going. Yeah.
Are there specific ideas that you say, you know what, this is more of a Jayne Ann Krentz idea, or this is more of a Jane Castle idea, and so forth? Yeah,
that's how it's settled out over the course of my career. So if you pick up one, there's 2 points I should make here. My writing tip of the day is for writers out there who are starting out in their careers: do not use multiple pen names. This is a very, very bad idea. Pick a name and stick with it. And the reason is because over the course of your career, it's impossible to promote 3 different names, 4 different names. It's a mess. But the advantage for me has been that now when people pick up a book under one of my 3 names, they know what they're getting.
You are so well branded under each name that, and you have one website, so you find them all.
It's also taken 50 books to do it, so you can't do that on a few. I mean, we talked about Elizabeth Peters and her 2 writing names, Barbara Michaels and Elizabeth Peters. You can look at Ruth Rendell, for example, and, she wrote as Barbara Vine for her really peculiar books, and then she wrote more straightforward books as Ruth Rendell, and people accepted that, that you knew what you were getting. And she did that for branding. I mean, there was nothing, surreptitious or anything about it. I think she felt that her Rendell fans would be alienated by some of the stories that she wrote as Barbara Vine. So Yeah, but you're right. Three or four is hard. 2 is manageable.
Do you know how many names you've had, Jayne?
No. It was always business reasons. It wasn't like I wanted to do this. But back in the days when I was first starting out, because this is how long I've been doing this, tying up an author's name at a publishing house was a very common practice, especially in romance, which is where I was operating. And your name was tied to a house, and that's how they kept you at the house.
Yeah, there were proprietary names. I mean, in the heyday of the somewhat formulaic cozy that Berkeley was doing, they were doing like 900 a year or whatever it was. They actually owned the names of a lot of the authors in the series, but the person writing it wasn't that person.
The Nancy Drew kind of.
Yeah, exactly. So, it's a complicated question, and probably less so today.
Yeah, I don't think we see it. I know I haven't seen a contract like that in decades, but but it was once commonplace.
Yeah, I believe it. Any other questions there, Patrick?
Do you have any secret pseudonyms that we don't know about, Jayne?
Probably just forgotten them. I'm sure they're out there. Every so often somebody will say, well, oh, Amanda Glass. And I'll think, oh yeah, I guess there was that name at one point along.
Really? Wow.
Don't go looking for it. It's
okay.
As you said, Barbara, Larry Block, he wrote under all these different names, and I don't know
the women.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, and remember when we did James Rollins' book launch on January 4th for The Starless Crown was the first time, I guess I sort of knew it, but I didn't realize that he had started out writing science fiction and fantasy as Clemens. I mean, I've known Jim forever, but somehow or other that had not come to my attention. So
I discovered Dean Koontz when I was 12 years old, and the first book I read by him was Whispers, and then I read Phantoms, and this would have been 1982, 1983, and I discovered at that age that he had a gazillion pseudonyms, and I started combing libraries. I lived in Michigan at the time, and so I would comb the libraries, and I started compiling a list of all of his pseudonyms. And then my dad lived in California, and so every summer when I would visit my dad, I would go to his local library and start combing. And was it K.R. Dwyer, Lee Nichols? I mean, I literally, Brian Coffey, I was searching out every Dean Koontz pseudonym. And this is in the 80s when you couldn't Google things, like it was, and I don't even know how I discovered some of those names, but I did.
Libraries.
That must have been it. It was the cross reference on the little card.
Yep.
But yeah, no, it was part of my vacation adventure was like, will I find a secret Dean Koontz?
You are giving me so much ammunition. I can hardly believe this, because I'm going to do a conversation with you next week for Quicksilver. Which
oh my gosh.
Absolutely. I'm telling you, Quicksilver, if you go to page 60, the start of chapter 8, there is a sentence in Quicksilver that if I could write that, I would die a happy woman. It's a really funny, and the whole thing takes place in Arizona. And I inadvertently did some, I remember a while back, he asked me to send him some photographs of, local stuff. And at the time I thought maybe he's moving here or something, but now I know, why he was doing that. It's just an amazing book. It's called Quicksilver.
I'll have to check that out. So
I'm going to talk to him about
pass on to him. When I was 12 years old and I read Whispers, I mean, that is the first romantic suspense novel I ever read. And that is what made me a reader. And it also made me want to become a writer. It was just like, it blew my mind that this was, because they didn't have young adult fiction really like they have now at the time. And so there was nothing for me. And I read Whispers.
He'll love hearing that story.
My mind. So yeah.
I will definitely tell him. And talk about animals. I mean, all of his recent books have animals. He's a dog person, but really have interesting animals. Anyway, we digress as we always do. Anything else?
Let's see here. Ivana asks, she says, Jayne, you've been in the business for a while. Is there any author you would like to meet who you haven't?
I'm sure there are, but you're catching me I will say that most of my closest friends are authors. over the years, and we've bonded over the writing, and a lot of my friends are authors. And I'm always curious about other authors, how they do it, because every author does it differently. And it's always interesting to talk shop. I'd like to meet Dean Koontz. That would be a fun.
I can arrange that. We can do that on Zoom. You have talked to the right person. No, I'm serious. I will work it out for one of his upcoming books.
Rachel and I could interview him.
He's a really amazing guy. And one of the highlights of my life was being invited to dinner at his house and exploring his library. But I unfortunately had broken my leg before I went, so I couldn't walk easily. And my attempt to explore the library foundered on my lack of mobility. He was very kind about it. Bummer. Right, Patrick, anything else?
Yeah, there's one from YouTube. Terry would like to know, let's see. Do your characters come from people you have met? Not really.
I'd like to meet the Nat Geo photographer. So Rachel, if you could work that out, that would be okay with me. I'll be glad to stand down there and hold the bow and arrow while you're shooting the line up the tree.
Right? Yeah.
I mean, what the story there, which we should really make clear, is that in order to put a camera in a hide, so to speak, photograph the birds, you're talking about like 100-foot or higher tree. So since it's not that easy to climb it with all this, you shoot a line up over hoping that it'll drop over a limb of the tree, and then you use the line to start hauling everything up into the tree.
It's like fishing line to start with.
Yeah.
And then you gradually, it's a thicker and thicker line until you get to a rope that, can hold your weight. Yeah.
Otherwise, you're thinking about little monkeys, running up and down the tree, carrying cameras and installing them, thanks to secret training in a facility like the Vortex Lab.
Exactly.
You guys could coordinate on this.
We really should.
You could. That'd be great. Wow. Well,
remember, Barbara, that
as always, ladies, a delight. Unless I'm cutting off another question.
No, I was just gonna say. Do you remember when that on that cruise when that they had to come and rescue, or what am I trying to say? The helicopter hovered above the boat.
Oh yeah.
They had somebody on board who had an embolism or something like that. I can't remember, but they rappelled down from the helicopter. That was pretty interesting.
Oh, it was when we all went to Alaska.
Yeah. Yes.
Oh,
right.
wow.
Yeah. Unfortunately, they weren't able to save her, and she was only 30 years old. It was really tragic, but that's what cruise ships do. And I'll tell you what's really interesting. I found out the hard way when my husband turned out to have to be helicopter evacuated from the middle of the Atlantic to the Azores. It's a long story, and he was all right. Was that it's the Coast Guard of the country to which the person is being evacuated that has to mount the rescue operation and send the helicopter. And what's hard is they have to sync the helicopter with the ship before they can lower whatever the sling or whatever it is they're going to take the patient, back up in. And it can be a really that's what Patrick's talking about, really complicated maneuver. And if it's a person who's really helpless, somebody has to rappel down the rope in order to help this person
stabilize them.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really scary thing to watch. I'd forgotten about that, Patrick, but that indeed happened.
Yeah.
Somewhere off British Columbia.
Yeah, terrifying.
It was indeed. Anyway, ladies, what an absolute pleasure. I hope that everybody watching this has not been driven mad by the digressions, but that's just how we roll sometimes. What can I say?
Really fun.
Seriously, these are absolutely wonderful books. Lightning in a Mirror, autographed. And I have to say, I'm not holding up Dangerous Ground because I don't have one, but you really do need to read Dangerous Ground before you read Crash Site, or it's not going to mean as much to you. And they are both fabulous. The other great part, which let me point out, is that they are only $12.99 per each, thanks to your publisher, Montlake. So you can buy two of Rachel for one of Jayne.
Let's not go there.
Not hardcover, but
Yes, no, it's just a wonderful book. I can't tell you how much I enjoyed it. And we've all loved Jayne's books. Jayne has a particular advocate in our staff called John, who, sells every walking person a Jayne Ann Krentz book if he can possibly do it. So it's great that we have these relationships. So thank you, ladies. Jayne, I'll see you in May. And Rachel, whenever we get a chance, let me know. Keep us posted on your publishing. Right. All right. Good night, everybody. Good night, Patrick. Thank you as always.